welcome to Real Life Beyond Faith, where a formerly Christian, currently atheist couple takes a deep dive into the experience of life after deconversion. This is episode 34. I'm your host, Jenica Crail.
And I'm your host, Patrick Crail. So this week, we had an interview. One of our recent friends on Facebook reached out to us, and we kind of discussed his background and what he's been through. His name is Joshua Richards, and he has his own podcast and blog.
He's an ex-minister.
Yeah, ex-minister. And now he considers himself a humanist.
Well, he also owns the label atheist.
Yes.
And secular humanist.
Yes.
Yeah, it was a really, really fascinating conversation with him. He is very well spoken and a very good talker. I can see why he was a pastor. And now he's working towards creating more of a secular community around him in Houston, Texas, and also just like building relationships and stuff, which is what we're all about. So It was really great talking to him. We're really glad that we had him on, and I think you guys will enjoy the conversation. So we'll get right to that because it was a little bit of a long interview right after this break. Hey there. If you like what we're doing and want to support us, you can head over to patreon.com/reallifebeyondfaith and become a patron for as little as $1 per episode. Your support is greatly appreciated and goes toward a podcast hosting site, equipment, time spent recording and editing, and our activism in our community and beyond. You'll also gain access to behind-the-scenes video content from our recording shenanigans. Another great way to support us is to give us a 5-star review on iTunes or Stitcher, or share our show on social media. You can find us at facebook.com/reallifebeyondfaith and Twitter at RLBFpod. And you can email us at reallifebeyondfaith@gmail.com.
All right, so this week we have a very special guest. We are talking to Joshua Richards. He is an ex-minister, now atheist, and he has a very interesting backstory that he wants to share with us and our listeners. So without further ado, here's Joshua.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Josh. Or do you go by Joshua or Josh?
Either. It doesn't matter. I've always tried to call myself Joshua, but as people get to know me, they drop that last syllable, right. So I really don't mind. You can go ahead and call me Josh.
It's too much work.
Yep.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, a little about me. As you mentioned earlier, I am an atheist. I don't shy from that label. I prefer the term humanist. Atheist just tells you what I don't believe. And we've all heard plenty of atheists say, oh, we don't need labels for this, that, and the other, so I'll skip that. But I'm a secular humanist. I live in Houston, Texas. I was a Methodist minister for quite some time. I also have an ordination in the Baptist Church. I was eventually, I liberalized from Baptist to Methodist, from Methodist to super liberal Methodist, and I Christed my way all the way to atheism. I was laughed out of a church my very last day working as a minister. I was told that I was no longer fit for the position I held. I was literally laughed out, and oddly enough, I hung around church a little while longer. Getting fired pushed me to realize that perhaps a life in the ministry wasn't for me. A life for most ministers is pretty comfortable. You're not rich, but your bills are paid. It's easy. I mean, you work 40 hours a week, but you're getting to see people all the time, and there's a communal aspect that there's something really beautiful about that. It's something that I'm hoping to build. And others are doing it, they're pioneering it. I'm hoping to help do in my own way, building secular communities. And so, but yeah, I was a minister. That didn't work out. I began to realize that not only is hell not real, if you do a little bit of research on the topic, what Jesus was talking about has nothing to do with what the Baptists are talking about, has nothing to do with what Dante's talking about. And also on top of that, I took an evolutionary biology course. That was for non-science majors because that's really important. I'm not a science major. I'm a philosophy classics guy. And once I got halfway through that class, I would show up an hour early and stay an hour late. And I painstakingly had a professor explain this to me. He had all of University of Houston's, all of these resources, all of these fossils. And I was in awe. It was so beautiful to me. And I thought I wanted to share this beautiful thing, this inspiring knowledge with other people. And I was promptly told that shit was not going to fly and that I was not fit to be a minister.
Oh, jeez.
And I wasn't a perfect minister on top of that. I wasn't great at the clerical side. I mean, I started this when I was 17, and the church's religion is dying. Not super fast,
right.
but it is still dying. And a lot of, especially your more liberal faiths, they are hurting for people. So it was easy for me to get in, and I was passionate, and I loved connecting with people. I obviously, as you can tell, love to talk, but I love that connection that religion offers. I grew up really lonely. I didn't have a lot of friends. I'm kind of socially awkward. I mean, not so much now, but religion was a way to connect with people. And I noticed real quick that it was a really, really cool way to bypass, say, if you're not good at baseball, you're not going to be friends with kids on the team. But if you're a part of the religion, it's an easy way to say to the group, hey, you can accept me, we can be friends, we can connect. And that's something that's always really impressed me, because honestly, it's hard to make friends. And in the past few years, one of the things that I've noticed, what's cool about secular communities and just communities in general, is if you're just a little bit open, you can find that most treasured thing that we seek, which is not only happiness, but connection.
Yeah. And that's the one thing that church has always done really well, is the community, the connection, feeling included and involved. So,
which those are all human things, not just religious things. And that was one of the important things that I learned when I was leaving religion, is that church gathering, like singing together, having community, those are things that humans do, and church doesn't own it. We can create secular communities that incorporate all of the same things, except for, worshiping some invisible being and, paying homage and obedience to him.
Yeah.
I totally agree. And it excites me to see that. I was actually going to add a second ago that, I mean, y'all guys are doing the same thing. For me, there's this fancy word philosophers use, and I'm going to try not to foray too much into philosophy. I don't like that. Look, if you smoke pot, that's fucking fine. I've done a lot of psychedelics, and maybe I can tell you a story or two about that later. But philosophy for me is about, it's the love of wisdom. It comes from that Greek. And I'm a huge philosophy nerd, but anyway, the point I'm getting at is that we can pursue true wisdom here, and there's something that philosophers use. There's a word that is noumenal, which means real to the point of transcendence, and I don't worship the way I used to, but one of the things that I think religion offers in a primitive state is a chance to encounter the noumenal. And of course, you have to give up all this stuff. You have to say all these prayers. But I think that it's like, just as, the book of Joshua attempts astronomy, and I think another part of the Old Testament, see, I know most of my New Testament well, but my Old Testament's kind of weak these days. But the Old Testament gets pi wrong. It says it's 3-1. Really, it's 3.14, or so on and so forth. But the point I'm getting at is, just as you were saying, that there's something about life that is so awe-inspiring that it brings us to worship. And I would just say perhaps a better word is noumenal. The word worship is a portmanteau of the words worth and ship. Your worthship, something that is so just desirable that it begs your attention. I don't believe in God, but there are these moments in my life where I feel so humbled. For some people like Sam Harris, that's like taking mushrooms. I don't want to talk too much about drugs or anything because I don't do that very often. Maybe once in the last 6 years I've eaten mushrooms. Definitely do it for fun. But I have these moments with my fiance. I have these moments when I see art that moves me. I have 2 Maine Coon cats, and if you haven't encountered a Maine Coon cat, I hope you do so. They're very large. They're very friendly. One is orange, and the other is gray, and she has a lot of different colors, and she's a half Siamese mix. And people might be thinking, why the hell is this guy going on about a cat? But the point is, I have these moments where me as a mammal and my cat as a mammal, we have this moment of love. And there is love there. Animals can love. We know enough about neurology and psychology to know that animals do feel connection. And there is just a sliver of metaphysics going on there, that there's something about life that, it's worth living. It's beautiful. And we can let you ask a question after this, but Albert Camus, I love the existentialists. They're not philosophers the way that Aristotle was. I love the real deal stuff, the nitty gritty math, logic, truth, reality is here. But I cannot ignore that Albert Camus says the problem of philosophy is, why don't we all kill ourselves? Well, the answer is because life is worth living, even for all of the bullshit and taxes and all of the hard stuff and the arguments and the pain and suffering and all of that shit. Despite all of that, it's worth living. And moments like the moment with the cat or art or whatever it is for you, it's different things for different people. Those moments of noumenal experience are so real. And so I think religion, it plays on that. And as you were just saying, atheists, non-theists, and all sorts of people who are in between, apatheists, people who just don't give a damn, they are just as capable of experiencing that. And that was such an eye-opener for me, seeing that there are people who can be good people who don't believe in God, and there are people who can experience love the exact same way as anyone else, just by virtue of being human. Unfortunately, it took me all the way till the age of like 25 to get there. But I know some who it took much later. But for me, that's so inspiring. To me, it's so beautiful. And I always come back to like some of the more vulgar points, like the bad shit, because I mean, I'm a 30-year-old living in Houston, and it gets fucking hot and sweaty, and I ride a bike to work, and I get pissed at people in traffic who almost hit me with their fucking cars as they're riding a bike to work. I mean, life sucks sometimes. Yeah. It does. But overall, it's beautiful, and that's part of like my message is taking that subjective route, because I'm always being attacked. How can there be an ultimate good or an objective morality? Well, there fucking isn't. I mean, you're gonna die one day, and that's it. Try not to suffer as much as you can, but ultimately. That doesn't mean life's not. Yeah, that doesn't mean life's not worthwhile, or that we shouldn't be good to one another. Now, that was quite a rant, so I'm gonna let you guys talk for a little bit and consider interrupting you.
Yeah, you bring up a good point that we can find inspiration in many things besides a god or religion, like art, music, nature. There's a lot of things that are very inspiring to people that you don't need a god or religion for.
In fact, I think religion kind of holds it back to a degree, because there's so much more beauty to be seen if you just take yourself out of the box that religion has created for you, or that like cultural expectations have created for you.
Yeah. And there was one time that your dad, Jenica, he played a couple songs for us. One was a worship song, and I don't know if you're familiar with, who was it?
Hillsong United?
Yes, Hillsong. Yeah. He played a Hillsong song and then compared it to a live performance from Coldplay, and just like the musicality of it, the building of the intensity,
the crowd dynamic, everything was very similar.
And
like,
there's
in the worship song, like everyone was like really into the song and like pouring their hearts out and singing.
Yeah, almost like pulsing to the music.
Yeah. And then we watched the Coldplay song, which of course is very like secular. And it was the same kind of feeling, the same kind of dynamic, the same kind of like chills that you get when you listen to a song that like really resonates with you.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's just the same thing. And I used to think that was the Holy Spirit. I'd be curious, Joshua, you said that you started ministry at the age of 17. What led you into that? Like, were you raised religious and just kind of like got all into it, or how did that happen?
Yeah, excellent question. So I have always been chatty. I've always been really into reading and feeling deeply. And my interest in the ministry at first, sorry, I'm writing a note here so that way I make sure I get this right, was this. As I've said earlier, I don't like to admit it too much, but I was a weird kid. I had my parents loved me growing up. My dad was gone a lot, but I was kind of an odd kid. I didn't have friends easily. I didn't relate terribly well. I was okay at reading, and so I read a lot of books, and I did pretty well in school. I'm a very disorganized guy. I leave notes everywhere, and but I would always do really, really well when it came time to do presentations. Like I always kicked so much ass doing presentations in elementary and junior high. And I like I said, I didn't have a whole lot of friends, but what I learned was when I was young, about 7 or 8, I joke this way. My joke is this: when I was 8, I had a drug problem. My mom would wake me up on Sundays and my ass got drugged to church. My mom caught religion at about 7 or 8, and so I had kind of basic ideas about God from like other kids and what I learned from either TV or other people in my life. But what I learned being raised in the church was that people who were pious, the people who knew the Bible, the people who played the part really well, and the people who were in the positions like preacher, worship minister, people who had those positions and the people who acted pious, they had immense respect. And it wasn't that I wanted, but they were so good at portraying happiness that, because I was raised Baptist. I wasn't raised with this idea that God's going to bless you with a nice car and nice clothes. I was raised with the idea that your life will be peaceful. Your life will have order. You will have peace that passeth understanding. And I would have night terrors as a child. I don't talk to, this is something that'll be unique to this podcast. I would sleep in my parents' room. My dad was out of country a lot growing up, but I couldn't sleep in my own room. I would have panic attacks. I would have night terrors. And it wasn't really until I was about 10, 11, 12, I would sleep on the couch. My parents eventually, at like 7 or 8, were like, get the fuck out of here. But at 10, 11, 12, I would start sleeping on, I think it was about 10. I would start, from 7 to 10, I began sleeping on the couch. But what I'm getting at is I eventually brought a TV into my room, and I just had awful times going to sleep. And so, religion was something that was kind of this comfort. I realized I wanted those people had. I wanted that comfort. I wanted to have all the answers. There was a guy in my grade who had read the Bible 3 times, and people treated this kid like he was king shit of fuck mountain. Like, oh, well, he's read the 3 times, and he's a good kid on a good path. And I tried to incorporate that. I did it my own way, though. I grew up loving rock music. I play guitar. I love the band Pantera. I loved the band Nirvana. I like Pantera more now. I still listen to them, but like I grew my hair long. And so for me, I embraced this side. The message of Jesus to me wasn't just love thy neighbor. It was also accept people as they are. So I grew my hair long, and people hated that. And I was like, you know what? The pictures of Jesus have long hair first, but also like, why don't you take that plank out of your own eye and shove it up your ass for judging me? I didn't say it quite like that, but as I think I said earlier, what I learned super early on in my Sunday school classes was if you can out Bible somebody, you can earn respect. And it wasn't about wanting to be a pompous asshole. I mean, I guess it was a little bit, but honestly, I wanted to be happy. I wanted to be able to sleep through the night. What I've learned now is that I had just some severe anxiety, and that maybe medication, a little bit of help, would have gone a long way. But
yeah, I can relate to that majorly.
Yeah, and I had begun to self-soothe with religion. And at this time, as I did this, somewhere around 14, 15, I began to realize that the only way I had a couple, like 1 or 2 friends, and I began to realize that I was really good at having these moments with people where I would say, you know what, I struggle with this, and this in the Bible, but I love authenticity. I love connecting, and I love you enough that I'm not going to let whatever little sin is in your life keep you from being my friend. And a lot of Christians do that. My mother is a perfect exemplar of that. And I felt that meant I would be a good candidate for the ministry, because here's the truth. I talk a lot, as you can tell. I love people. I'll talk to dogs. Like, I honestly want people to be happy. I want to be happy.
Yeah.
I want people in my life to be, I want them to be left warmer and more kind. And in turn, I want to be left warmer and more kind by knowing them. And I think things get along better that way. And so I felt that the ministry would be that. I learned quickly on that that is nothing like that. Ministry is hard work, and people will mistreat you and step on you. Physically and emotionally abusive pastor my first go around, as a youth pastor, and then I met other ministers who were okay, and then I met other ministers who were essentially, their opinion was, look, I don't give a damn, just do what you're supposed to do and stay out of my way. But to put, I guess, the last a coda on your question of how I ended up there was, I thought by embracing ministry I was going to find what I want most in life, which is to be happy. Aristotle says that's what all humans desire, knowledge of the good. The aim of the good life is happiness, and I have always wanted that, and I've always felt that that's so hard. Like, even when I have my basic needs met, it's hard to feel good, to feel happy. At least for me it is sometimes. I mean, I've gotten better at it these days, but I thought, that's a guaranteed in. If you're a minister doing God's will and preaching the gospel to other people, then you're damn well going to be blessed, and you're going to feel that presence. And at the time, I did. I thought I felt that presence, and I was chasing that. And so that's how I got pulled in. Was I so badly wanted to be like the ministers that either I had or these other charismatic people who were just pretending to be happy all the time, because if they can get other people to believe it, that makes it more true for them. And I so badly wanted to be happy and whole, and I wanted to just feel that acceptance and love that everybody else was pretending. And interestingly enough, sometimes you can fake it till you make it.
I was just going to say that.
And even more interesting, sometimes you can really build community. And there are so many people who, when you press them, like a minister I used to have, he was my counselor for a while, and he was never my minister, but he was a minister. He actually quit the ministry to become a counselor. He was 84 and died in 2013, but he was challenged, and the government inspected him for being a communist because he created a resale shop that was using its proceeds to benefit those in the black community. And so he was under fire for being a suspected communist. But what he would tell me in these moments is, he would tell me, he was one of the first people, I must have been 18 or 19 at the time. He would say, evolution's true. There probably is no afterlife. The Bible is not historically accurate, but the community that is built is worthy. And me and him would probably disagree about that now. I think he would completely support what I'm doing. But that was somebody who, I mean, he was born way too early to see what's going on now. And so that is a really long-winded answer to your question of what kind of drew me to the ministry.
No, that's great. Very interesting journey that you've been on.
I have a question.
Sure.
So you were in the ministry for a while, and you mentioned your college course talking about evolution and all that stuff. That kind of like got your wheels turning. So this is kind of a two-parter. Was that the beginning of your process, and what led you to lose your faith? And then you also talked a lot about happiness and trying to be, as happy as possible. How did that transition from faith to atheism affect you in your happiness? And basically, how did that go for you?
Okay, so let me make sure I got you right. You want to know kind of how I transitioned out of the faith and how that kind of affected the happiness thing for me, right?
Right.
Okay, so I had already before that course had begun liberalizing. I read a book. Let's see if I can remember his name. It's called Finding Darwin's God. And I want to say I'm going to forget his name. So I'm going to have to Google it and pretend like I know something. I usually pride myself on knowing dates and everything like that. It's going to kill me. Okay. Kenneth Miller, I think. Okay, I Googled it. Kenneth Miller. Anyway, I read Kenneth Miller's book called Finding Darwin's God, and he does this amazing job of synthesizing. He is a committed evolutionist, and he's like, this can fit with religious faith. So what had happened was, on my own, as a young man, I began to read the Calvinists at 15 and 16, and I would argue with these college-age Calvinists. I don't know if you know what that is. If so,
Yes.
that's a good thing.
Yep.
But I began studying hardcore to want to refute these guys, because I think it's a disgusting theology, and I think it
really
reflects a God that is incredibly inhumane and cruel.
I went to a church where they believed in Calvinism, and I remember one day specifically I was in the singles group, and I mentioned to the group, I was like, so I've been looking into Calvinism versus Arminianism, and I feel like I fall more on the Arminian side, and that was not okay for me to say. Not okay. Like, they attacked me. I'm like, what the fuck? Or anyway, continue.
Yeah. And so, yes, and that it's a disgusting theology, and I try not to say things like that, because I love having conversations with believers, and I try and find the middle ground. And so I really don't care for atheists who are saying, oh, so-and-so is stupid, or that's stupid.
Yeah. Right.
Sometimes my tongue gets loose, but I kind of feel like this crowd is not going to judge me for that. But to answer your question, what had happened was, at about 18, I had begun realizing that my faith, if I was going to maintain faith in God, other things would have to go. Because science is true. The earth is older than 6,000 years old. The Gospels paint radically different pictures of Jesus. I mean, what day did Jesus die? Consult the Gospels. They say different things. I recently led a group reading Mark and John, just those two Gospels. And it wasn't a hate group. It wasn't a bash the Bible time. We treated it like classical literature. But anyway, what I realized as a young man was that for this stuff to be true, it would have to be true in a spiritual sense, and we would have to be generous to the text. And so this just kind of kept happening. As the older I got, the more I realized so much had to go. Martin Luther King even said it, and people hate Martin Luther King for this. Certain people do, because the word that is translated to virgin, alma, in the Septuagint, it is the word young woman. It doesn't mean virgin. Mary, there was if Mary was a person, she probably was boning. I mean, she could have very well have had Joseph. Joseph could have very well have been Jesus's birth father. In fact, why do two of the Gospels have his genealogy? I think it's just one of the genealogies goes through Joseph. I mean, anyway, so to get back to this question, because there's so many rabbit holes I could follow. What happened was, I began to realize that there are a lot of problems. I could list you so many things that are either contradictions or discrepancies. Like John has Jesus cleansing the temple, throwing over the tables, and that's what gets Jesus killed. That's the last straw. But in Mark, he does that early on. He does it early on. John puts it at the end because he wants to show Jesus as the sacrifice, as the Lamb of God being sacrificed for the sins of others. Mark wants to portray Jesus as somebody who was a revolutionary who was killed for being a revolutionary, and the story changed. And for me, I began to see these cracks. Evolution was true. Science is real. And as I began that was my introduction into philosophy, because one of the core truths of philosophy is the law of non-contradiction. It cannot be both A and not A. It just can't happen. Mathematics tells us this. 2 and 2 make 4. They will never make 5, ever. It just cannot happen. It is logically impossible. God cannot make a triangle with 4 sides. Okay, I've said that boring philosophical shit. I began to apply it, though, because what I learned is that philosophy serves a lot of purposes, but here are 2 of the most important ones. It enlightens us. And the other side of that is that it also humbles us because we don't know a whole lot. Like Plato, his dialogues, I hate a lot of his ideas, like the idea of forms and all that, and that's a whole other podcast. But the other thing that's valuable is Plato shows us we don't know anywhere near as much as we think we know. Knowledge is something that we usually define it as a justified true belief, which means you can prove that it's true and that you're certain of it. And so it's something you have to believe, and it has to be provable. And if it's not that, then you don't know it. You just happen to believe it. Okay. The other thing that philosophy does, aside from that, is it consoles us and it shows us these beautiful things. But the other thing is it cuts through the bullshit. And so as I began to become impressed with this, because the Calvinists taught me this. The Calvinists taught me, oh, well, if you're going to take this verse and this verse, you can make this conclusion. It began working in the opposite direction. And so over the years, I kept doing this. I kept rereading the Bible. I kept teaching classes. I kept holding on to the core belief that God existed. And in order to keep that, I had to start getting rid of other little beliefs that didn't work, or other beliefs that were inconsistent or inaccurate. And over the years, a lot of things kept having to go. In order to maintain that God exists, you have to be willing to let a lot of things go. Okay, well, the Israelites didn't cross over the Red Sea. It's really the Sea of Reeds. And it wasn't really so much of a miracle because sometimes the tide gets low and people can walk across it. And so there are all of these little things, not to mention outright lies in the Bible, that after a while I began to realize that, okay, I want to hold on to God existing, so I'm going to let this go. I'm going to let this go. And for me, evolution and hell, I had to let go of hell and I had to embrace evolution. I was still believing in God, but I began to realize the religion I had then looked nothing like Christianity, but I was still thinking, okay, well, you know, the church is still a good place and a lot of churches do good work. I will never discount that. There are plenty of liberal churches who I am totally willing to go speak at, to partner with on some issues as long as they aren't assholes. And I'm sure they say the same thing about me. But as the years went on, my theology was changing, and really, and I'll be honest enough to say, I would still be hanging out in the church if I wasn't kicked out. The trauma of being laughed out and being mocked and pushed made me leave the church. Jeez. And I hung out and I visited churches for a while, and it never really worked out. But that experience was what finally allowed me, after having almost, my livelihood. I had a serious relationship at the time that ended. I had friendships that ended. My community, a lot of my community was overnight gone after being fired. You really learn who cares about you. And there were some people who stayed in touch. But and by the way, I'm so glad a lot of those relationships left. There were a lot of fake people. I'm so much happier now. I think I mentioned I have a fiance now, and I absolutely adore her. She's downstairs, I think, listening to this. She might be listening to music. But so what had happened was, it wasn't just my mind changing, but a big part of that was also being pushed out. I was all ready to reform the religion. I mean, Jesus didn't think he was starting a new religion. Jesus thought he was fixing an old religion, as I understand him. I'm not a mythicist. I mean, obviously the Bible's legendary. I think there probably was a guy named Jesus. But to be to just wrap up that question, because I talk entirely too goddamn much.
This is good.
That's the point of podcasts.
Yeah.
Talk away.
Thank you. but to answer that, it was partially being kicked out and having my heart broken. Being those people, so many people were so, except for a few. One of my best friends, who we didn't go to the same church, but he's still one of my. He was just a friend I've always had. And then the minister I mentioned earlier, Dr. Robert Starbuck, who became a psychologist. Aside from them, everybody just kind of dropped me. They were like, "We don't want anything to do with you." And as I began to really reevaluate, for the very first time, I began to think to myself, maybe there is no God. Darwin lost his faith. Darwin kind of had a super liberal faith, but he just didn't give a damn, really. He's like, sure, God exists, whatever. It was when his daughter died. His young daughter passed away from this terrible disease, and it broke his heart. And it was that trauma that pushed him to realize, I don't believe this anymore. And that was it for me. Was I had already began believing in Darwinism. I began believing in what philosophers call deep time. So the earth is 4 billion years old. The universe is we think somewhere around 14.6 billion years old. I mean, cosmology is fucking hard shit, but these beliefs had begun to sink in. I could no longer deny them, but being fired and being pushed out gave me the freedom. Of course, it also took away a lot of money that I desperately needed. It gave me finally that freedom to say, you know what? No one can punish me. I can't sink any lower for being honest with myself. I was like, I don't believe this anymore. There are good things in the Bible. Love thy neighbor. When Jesus is in a good mood, he says some good shit. But you know what? So does Aristotle. And so does Lao Tzu. And so does Plato. And so does Xenophon. And so does Thales. And so does so many other people.
Without all the dogma.
So,
for me, that was when I realized this is not for me anymore. And it's been really hard trying to find my way back. I'll be perfectly honest, and then come back and finish answering the question, that finding a job, especially with what happened to me after leaving the church, has been really hard. I still don't make anywhere near as much money as I did working in the ministry, and I struggle so very hard. And it gets better. I'm hoping one day to eventually surpass where I was. But for me, it was finally not having to believe that. And my family didn't take it very well, but it was finally being in a place when I realized, you know what? Nothing worse can happen to me by being consistent and sincere with what I really believe. And I just realized that one day it didn't hurt my feelings to say God doesn't exist. It wasn't angry. Some people, they're like, God doesn't exist, and they're mad. But being mad at God's like being mad at like the tiger from Frosted Flakes. It's not going to do shit. And I just realized, I don't believe it, and that's okay. It's okay to not believe in God. You can still have all of the wonder and beauty, and that took time. I was mad for a while. I was upset for a while, but the Darwinism, that didn't push me there. Honestly, that got me to go from being a conservative dipshit to just being a liberal Christian, but to finally realize that theism is not tenable, or that it's, at least for me, it's not. That took some serious personal work and honestly a little bit of trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting how being an open book, like one of the good things about that is that it shows you who your true friends are, because the ones who stick around are the ones who truly loved you to begin with and will love you no matter what you believe or don't believe. I found that to be very true as I came out of religion. It's like, oh, well, I guess I don't really want those people to be my friend anyway. And that experience that you shared of being laughed out of the church, that sounds horrifying. Like, what happened, if you don't mind sharing?
Some of the lessons I had given and some of the choices that I had made were read aloud to me. I I was going to go we did this big deal thing for Advent, which is what liberal Christians call Christmas. And so I had said to one of my superiors, hey, at the end of this Advent celebration, I'm going to go on a trip for about 8 days. And so about a month after I came back, they said, I was surprised. 1 week, like 6 days. So on a Saturday, or no, it wasn't a Saturday, it was a Monday, I got an email saying, hey, this Sunday we're going to give you a review. They do a review every 6 months to kind of see how you're doing. And I had one about a month prior, and I got this email, hey, we're going to have a review. And they sat down and they said, let's look at what you've been doing. And honestly, like I've said, my clerical side, I'm a disorganized person. It wasn't perfect. Like, I could get things done, but I wasn't like it's kind of like if they're looking for something to fire you over, they can find it. But then they said, let's look at this shit you've been saying. Darwin, hell, do you have any idea how arrogant you sound? What were you thinking talking about this? And then the last thing was they were like, and how dare you? How can you just leave your position here and go on a trip and spend a week away from your job? What made you think you could do that? And I said, well, I gave you notice. I wasn't like the head. I was never even the head pastor. I was like, I served in an associate position, but they also read out. They were like, these are the things you've been saying. And how arrogant are you that you think you can just say this in a church? And they literally asked me, they were laughing and they were like, what made you think this was okay? And I told them, and this got a laugh out of them. And it's the only time in my life I did not want to laugh when I was being sincere. And I said, it's true and it's inspiring. Like, people deserve to know this. Like, I am so mad that people never told me that when Jesus talks about hell, the word for that in the New Testament is Gehenna. In Hebrew, it's Gehinnom. It means the valley of Hinnom. There was this place people burned their trash. The myth of that place, the urban legend, was that people sacrificed their children to a pagan god named Molech, and you can find this shit in the Old Testament. That's why one of the greatest sins in the Old Testament is to kill your children. Ironically, God says to Abram, hey, go take Isaac and burn his ass. Anyway, just put a pin in that thought for a second.
And then kill all the firstborns of Egypt.
Metaphor where he's talking about a place where people sacrifice their children to Molech. If I saw a child die, that would break my heart. One of the things also, and I didn't mention this earlier, is the Amalekites, the Midianites, the Jebusites, the Perizzites, the Hittites, the Canaanites. Their children were all put to the sword and killed, except for the young virgins of the Midianite women. God, I guess, decided that the horny men of Israel could have themselves some young virgins. And if Christians hear that, I'm sorry for my tone, but I'm not, because if I were ever to see if I were to see a person put to the sword, that would ruin my life. If I were to see a child killed, have their head dashed against a stone, have a sword put through them, that would ruin me. And Jesus is using a metaphor, because every Jew would go to Jerusalem if they were able 3 times a year for 3 of the 7 Jewish festivals. Jesus knew his audience. And when he talks about hell, he's talking about how people are so apart from living a life that is connected, as Kierkegaard would say, that was authentic, vibrant. And I am willing to argue till the fucking cows come home about what the historical Jesus may or may not have meant by that. But he fucking sure as hell was not talking about eternal torment. Sure, the Bible says the worm dieth not. He's using metaphor. And if you really want to push a theology that says a loving believing God would put somebody in eternal hell, I am more than ready to use my black belt in epistemology and ontology on your ass. And I know there are people who are Bible nerds who will dissect stuff like that and go on tirades about me. And honestly, I love that shit, because right now I'm not trying to speak to somebody who's theologically inclined. What I'm trying to get at is that Jesus was using a metaphor. He knew his audience. He was talking about hell meaning something entirely different than what preachers mean. And I, as a pastor then, and as a humanist pastor now, I'm not really a pastor, but I want to be one day. Fuck it, I am a humanist pastor, damn it.
There you go.
Now, my good news, the better news I preach is that, hey, guess what? This isn't true. Jesus was using a metaphor. And I would tell people this back then. I used to have nightmares about being sent to hell. I had nightmares about my father being sent to hell. My dad cannot stand bullshit. My dad believes in God. He believes in Jesus. He can't stand the fakery and the horse shit that comes with church. Yep. And I remember being told in 3rd grade, well, your father forsakes the congregation and he's not a true Christian if he does that. That broke my heart. And to have, as a child, to have nightmares about hell, as a teenager, do you have any idea how many sexual experiences I could have had? And I'm glad I didn't have them now, but that's a different conversation. There are so many pleasures I denied myself, and perhaps it's okay, perhaps it's good to be responsible and not to have sex too young, but I denied myself those things, not because it was the responsible thing to do, but because I was full of fear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Exactly.
And not to mention,
was so full of fear.
Like even the guilt and shame that there is just around masturbation, like pleasuring your own self, even if it's not with somebody else. Like there's just so much guilt and shame surrounding all of that stuff. And you hold back and you don't do these things out of fear. And the thing is, like, people will talk about hell. It's not like that isn't damaging to people, you know? Like, if that's not what Jesus actually meant, wouldn't these people want to know that so they can teach their flock the right thing, something that's not going to damage them and cause them all kinds of fear and, like, in your case, nightmares and shit? It's just unbelievable.
For me, I wanted to free people. I wanted to set people free from these old dogmas that have no place being taught at all. And so it makes sense looking back at it now. And a lot of my friends who were never believers were like, yeah, I saw that coming. And I'm like, no, you didn't. But and maybe they did. Who knows? But for me, it was a passion for truth, because I'm wrong about all sorts of things. I have no problem embracing Socratic humility, because I talk about all this stuff and I put on a good voice, but the truth is I'm a seeker. I'm trying to find these answers. I want to know the truth. If God is out there, I'd really love to find him. I'd really love to know, but so far I haven't found any of that. So if you're a believer, go ahead and pray for me. I don't think it'll do any good, but if he's out there, sure, why not? But you're exactly right. Like, fear has no place. I think that is the most human thing to me, that once you've had your needs met, the most beautiful thing a human can do is to face and conquer their fears. There is this quote Thomas Jefferson has saying, I have sworn on the altar of God Almighty eternal hostility against every form of tyranny against the mind of man. And that's a long sentence, but that to me is just stand up to your fears. I was afraid of God or what he would do to me. I was afraid of hell. And, you know, a lot of people get hung up here. And I know we've gone on for a while and we have a little bit more time left, but I want to just talk about that for me, all of this whole experience, it was like a race. Like a marathon, and all of this stuff right here was just crossing the start line, not the finish line, the starting line. Because what I found is after that, there is a depth and a beauty and a majesty and a terror. Something is terrific and terrible. That's the same root word my man. There is something so beautiful about being alive and creating your personality, and it's scary, and that's okay, and we can do that together. People ask Bill Nye, what was before the Big Bang? And he says, I don't know. Let's find out.
Yeah.
And
and that's
people
okay.
will say,
Yes.
and a lot of, yes, and it's okay to not know. It's okay to not be sure. Knowledge is rare. Certainty is rare. Humility is such a beautiful thing. There's so much I don't know. I want to know. Let's
And
figure that
curiosity
shit
is a
out
good thing, too.
together.
Yeah.
And humanity has made such great progress. And so for me, if there's any message that I would impart to any listener outside of this story, aside from don't go into ministry, it's a terrible choice, is that on the other side of that, and even if you were never a believer, my fiance was never really a devout believer, but what we share is what I was just talking about here, is that the joy of life is we are, not only are we made out of like star stuff, as Sagan said, and he also said we carry the salinity of the ocean in our veins. We are matter made conscious. We have this brief, beautiful life. I had somebody once say to me, what meaning does your life have without God? What meaning does your life have? And they sounded so sincerely upset, and I was kind of an asshole because I had had a couple of drinks at the time. I was my 26th birthday, and I had been drinking, and I had just come out of the closet as an atheist, and I said, have you ever had sex or ice cream? And that's kind of a
Good
silly
points.
answer, and it works, but the truth is this, is that we have this life, this beautiful gift given to us, and I don't believe in God. If you do, that's fine, but don't miss out on the joy of finding out who you are, finding your purpose, finding what makes you happy, finding that thing in life that brings joy to your heart, as long as it doesn't harm another person. So what scares me is that there are so many people who end up in these religions or these cults or these political ideologies where they miss out on the most important thing about being alive, which is conquering your fear and finding happiness. I live a life where I work this little job and I hope I find a better one, and I complain about being poor, but fuck all that. I have somebody in my life who loves me. I have cats that love me. I have I fucking love my kitties. I have friends who love me. I play guitar, and I have friends I come and jam with. And to me, the music's not all that great. I mean, some of the songs are kind of badass. I'll put up a SoundCloud one day. But, that experience of connecting, that's what it's about. It sounds stonerish, and that's fine. I'm like, I don't do the hallucinogens the way I used to. But the journey, that experience, getting lost in a conversation, getting lost rambling on a podcast, like that's what life's really about, getting lost in the story. So I understand why people are religious. We find ourselves in these stories, but do it for yourself. Go out there, create yourself, find what the good is, challenge me. If you think I'm wrong, like, let's argue that shit out, motherfucker. But more important than anything else, be true to yourself and find that joy that the philosophers and the poets talk about. Find that yearning and fulfill it as best you can, because guess what, motherfucker? You're going to die one day, and it's going to be some other naked ape's turn to find out what makes them happy and what makes them blessed. And I don't mind using the word blessed. I don't fucking care. I use religious language. But it's going to be someone else's turn. You're going to fucking die one day. So you know what? Use your time wisely. The fact that our lives are so short and so finite makes them so much more precious. If there's a life after this, fucking great. I can't wait. But you know what? There might not be. So enjoy your time with your friends. Enjoy sex. Enjoy ice cream. If there's somebody you love, fucking tell them you love them. I love my mother, and I try and tell her all the time, even though we don't believe the same things. You know what? I love you and I adore you. I try not to be petty to my fiance because I love and adore her. If there's anything in your life that is good, treat it well. And more importantly, lastly, love yourself. Treat yourself well. Don't ever forget to love yourself. Love yourself enough to ask tough questions. Love yourself enough to eat some fucking broccoli now and again. I'm struggling with that. I had to have cauliflower today. Oh my God. And I'll let y'all talk some more, but that's my thing is I'm so excited. It wasn't just leaving faith that had me become so excited about life, but it was learning to embrace my humanity. It was learning to embrace myself and to accept my fears and my shortcomings and my strengths. And it was learning to just fall in love with life. That didn't lead me. Some people that takes them to Jesus. To me, it took me away. But to me, that's the most important thing is learning to just get over those basic human fears and anxieties and find out how am I going to live? Asking the questions that humans have been asking as long as we know, as far back as we know. I mean, I'm not saying anything new that Plato, Xenophon, Diogenes, Socrates, or Thales said. Not a single word of it.
Yep, absolutely. So you said that we each need to create our own selves. How would you say you're creating yourself now? Like, what are you doing with your life now? What's your path?
I have a podcast. I go on as many podcasts as I can. I'm trying to work through a book, but I speak. You can find videos. There are more to come, but I reach out to people. I mentioned I have a book. Not a book, excuse me. I went through the books of the Bible. I am working on a book, but I'm going through these books of the Bible. I led a small group, and I create myself by the choices I make. I mean, the existentialists put it better, but the choices you make are how you create yourself. And so I reach out to my friends. I reach out to people I want to spend time with. I create myself by having a non-theist website, by having a non-theist podcast, by being a humanist, by just trying to, I mean, my tagline, it's cheesy, but it's retired minister, friend of reason, lover of life. That's how I create myself.
That's really beautiful. All right, point people to that then. Point them to your YouTube channel, your podcast, all that stuff.
Okay, my site is JRRTalking.com. My Twitter is JRRTalking_com. Please follow me. I fucking need it. The YouTube channel, you can type in JRR Talking. I'm just getting this off the ground. I'm for a year, and I'm just now starting to get a little bit of attention. Tomorrow, awesome. My interview with Anthony Magnabosco, a wonderful human being, goes live. But I'm trying. Honestly, my hope is to one day. It might not be soon. It probably won't be. But to one day be active as a leader in a secular community. And so, yeah, you can find me, Joshua Richards, on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter. If you're in Houston, look me up. I love to have coffee. I love to talk. And as a other aside, I am only lightly affiliated with the Clergy Project and recovering from religion. That's awesome. But if you're struggling through some shit and you need somebody to talk to, reach out to them. Reach out to me. If you just want to talk and say, hey, if you just want to click like on my page, I would love that. But if you just want to talk, even if you think I'm wrong about some shit, chances are I am, reach out to me. Like, let's chat. I mean, it is so cool that there are so many people out there. Interact with me. I'd be happy to. I'm very easy to find.
Awesome. I love that.
That's awesome.
Thank you so much for sharing with us today. That was some really interesting, awesome stuff that you had to share. And I know you have so much more to talk about, so many more stories and everything. We'll probably have to have you on again sometime.
Yeah, for sure.
But I'd love to tell you about drugs sometime.
Yeah.
The good stories and the bad. But maybe y'all can come on my podcast and I'll let you talk. I promise.
Awesome. Sounds
Would
good.
be honored.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, maybe we'll have you back, or people can always just find your podcast and find your YouTube channel to learn more about you and reach out. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on. It was an honor.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Take care.
Well, that was our interview with Joshua Richards. Hope you guys enjoyed that. It was a really great conversation. Go check out his stuff. It sounds like he's got some really interesting things to say, some interesting stories. He's experienced a lot in his life.
And coming up, he is going to be releasing a podcast interview with Anthony Magnabosco. And if you guys don't know who he is, he's big on the street epistemology. He kind of started that.
He has a YouTube channel where he talks to people on the street about why they believe what they believe.
Right. And I also know he just did an interview with Dr. Daryl Ray of Secular Sexuality. So look forward to that.
Absolutely. So now it's time to thank our wonderful patrons. Our patrons who pledge $5 or above to each episode get a personalized plug at the end of every episode. Right now, we have 5 such patrons, and so we'll go ahead and start with those. The first is Rich Kemp. He would like us to plug Recovering from Religion, which is recoveringfromreligion.org. It's an organization that helps people who are leaving religion or are questioning their faith and their beliefs and need somewhere to turn for support. They have a helpline and a chat line where people are there to answer phones or to answer chats and to help, find resources, have someone to talk to. It's a really great organization. They also have support groups in some areas of the country, so you can look on meetup.com and see if there's a support group near you.
We also want to thank Christopher Powell of the Tri-State Freethinkers. He wants us to plug the Tri-State Freethinkers. It's a great organization in the tri-state area of Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana, and we are members, and Jenica's actually a board member. They do a lot of great things in the area. They focus in activism, community service, education, and social events. So they kind of have a little bit of everything for whatever flavor you're interested in, to help get people involved. If you want to help people, if you want to hang out with people, if you want to learn things, great group of people. So yeah, if you're in the tri-state area, go check them out.
Awesome. And then we'd also like to thank Thomas Smith of Serious Inquiries Only. His podcast is a skeptical, critical thinking look at topics like politics, religion, science, pretty much anything that's relevant, interesting, in the news, etc. He brings on really interesting guests and talks about basically anything that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Next, we want to thank Marissa Alexa McCool. She wants to plug the Inciting Incident podcast. She hosts that with Bethany Futrell, and they talk about current events told through the skeptic perspective. It includes a great variety of guests, and they don't apologize for its pro-SJW stance. They're good people, and we love them. And she also wants to plug The Cis Are Getting Out of Hand. It's another podcast where they basically talk about different situations where cisgendered people get out of hand and how we can be better allies to the trans community.
Right. But it's actually not for us or about us at all.
Yeah.
It just helps to listen sometimes and to, gain some insight into
good
ways we can.
And insight.
But really, it's just a podcast for trans people by trans people. It's their little area of the world where they can just let it all out.
Yeah. And talk about how we cis people suck.
Because we do.
Yeah.
And lastly, we would like to thank the Wayward Willis podcast. They're a relatively newer $5 above patron to us, and we greatly appreciate them. We recently had John Willis on the podcast, actually, just last week. And their podcast is an atheist podcast with a slant towards secular humanism and education. Their goal is to publicize religious topics and discuss the effects of religion on a secular society in an entertaining way. And yes, I did just read that right off their website. But they say it better than I could, so there you go.
Yeah. Very entertaining and insightful podcast.
Great podcast. It's John Willis and his son, Logan. And they're really entertaining to listen to, and they have a great dynamic. So yeah, check them out. And then we also have a couple of patrons who are at $5 or above who don't have a plug. And those are
Mark Ramsey and Justin Krebs.
Thanks, guys.
And thank you to all of our other patrons. We always appreciate the support, no matter how small.
Or big.
Or big.
Or small.
Or small.
Or medium.
Anyways, thank you guys so much. If you haven't already, please go leave us a review or a rating. That would also help us.
Indubitably.
Good word.
Thank you. Well, we will catch you guys next time. But in the meantime,
keep it real.